right, you're welcome back to Bettermusic by Kaystrings, sponsored by Grace Hill Recordings. Moving on EQs, there are different types of EQs. We have the passive EQ, we have the active EQ. An example of passive EQ will be the Paulette passive EQ. And then we also have the active EQs. Active EQs, there are quite a lot of them these days. We have graphic EQs, and then graphic EQs, and then we also have parametric EQ. Parametric EQ is now the standard of every DAW or every workstation which you'll be familiar with, be it Logic, be it Cubase, be it Pro Tools, be it Studio One, FL. They all use parametric EQ as standard EQ. They have other EQs too that are built in, which are stock plugins. But most of the time, the question is, will my EQ do the job? Is my EQ as good as other expensive EQ out there? And then the answer is a big yes and a small no. Big yes because if you go to a store to buy a car, a brand new car will take you from point A to point B. No matter what happens, be it Benz, be it Toyota, be it whatever it is, point A to point B is going to take you. And the same thing you have with these EQs. They will do the work. Every average EQ you buy these days will do the work, and then guess what? They're going to do it very, very well. That's what a lot of people don't know. They think you spend so much money buying expensive EQs. Most of the other EQs, what they do, the expensive one, what happens is that most of these EQs have been modeled, from the original hardware, and then it means that they have to model not just the way the EQ sound, but the circuits, the transformers, the capacitors, all of that, the input stage, output stage, And then think about it for console EQs, which happens to be EQs you find in console. They have a particular way they sound. It's not that they sound really different, but they just add color, which is most time. They add harmonics, they add color, harmonics generate some sort of saturation into your source material. And then some people have just gotten to the fact that that's the way they hear the sound. That's the way they understand what they're hearing. So they tend to go for the high end. It's not really that the high end is a lot better than the than the regular stock plugin that comes with your DAW. Because the ones that comes with your DAW, a lot of engineering has been put into place for them to work the way they work. So it's not like they're really modeling anything. They usually model, but they don't. They're not modeling the harmonics and this and that and that, all this cumbersome work. If you're increasing 10K, it's 10K in Logic, it's 10K in Pro Tools, it's 10K in Fruity, it's 10K in Reason, it's 10K, It's not 10K with harmonics. So with all of that being said, I will like to start with a parametric EQ. And one of the popular one I'm using Pro Tools. Like I said, it's the same thing across all DAWs, just little differences. But this one, it won't be so different, sure. So I'll start with this 7-band EQ from Avid. This is one of the best you ever use anyways, because it's a great plugin. It's a great EQ. I don't know what it was modeled after, but it's a fantastic, fantastic plugin. This EQ is called 7-band because it's a parametric EQ. The reason why they call it 7-band is that this section is one band, this section is another band, this section called LF is another band, this section is another band, this one is another band, this one is another one, and then finally this. If we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, that makes 7-band EQ. And then don't be scared anytime you see EQs with plenty knobs and buttons and things like this on them. They are just names. Let me start with the input and output of this one. Most equalizers don't come with input and output. This is fantastic because of this input and output. Ask me why. Imagine that you've recorded a drum, and then the drum you've recorded is you've maxed out up to like -2 dB in terms of frequency, in terms of volume, and then how the drum was recorded. He was recorded pretty hot. If I put it into this EQ, it will be reading something about this spot and pretty much close to clipping. By the time I start to add things and I start to add frequency, boost frequencies, and then I come here and I boost another frequency, guess what? We're maxed out already. We're clipping, we're distorting. It's called internal distortion. It happens inside plugins, and it may also affect what you hear so that the source material isn't as clear as it was sounding before. And then you feel like, this EQ is bad, this EQ is bad. It's not that the EQ is bad, it's just that it was recorded hot. So in that case, what do? I drag down the volume. And then guess what? I can go as low as -20, bring it, gain, stage it down, gain, stage it down. And fantastic. Most EQs don't come with this. You have to gain stage before they hit the plugin. But this is fantastic because of this input. And this output, maybe the next plugin after this one, the next plugin after the EQ might be a compressor. And then at the end of the day, you've done so much corrective EQing where it's now low. I need to just add a little bit more. You could add a little bit more to the output so that there's a substantial amount of signal hitting the next plugin. Fantastic from Avid. The second part I want to talk about is this HPF. HPF, it means high pass filter. And then what is high pass filter? Let me clear this out of the way. High pass filter. What's high pass filter? High pass meaning it's going to let the high frequency pass, but cut the low frequency. So high pass filter or low cut filter, they mean the same thing. They're just trying to confuse you. So high pass filter or low cut filter. What does it do? If I activate it here to be the high pass filter and I turn it on, if you notice what happens is that you see this slope down. If I increase the frequency all the way to, let's say, 300, and then what I've done is that I've set the high pass filter that everything above 300 should pass through this EQ, but filter out everything below 300, from 300 all the way down. Filter out that. But most of the time, it's not actually going to filter exactly from 300 down. As you can see from the graph here, you still have a little bit up until 100. Ask me why. That's where this Q comes in, The Q comes from the name quotient. So the quotient of change, that's what this Q is. Or it's also the bandwidth, how wide or narrow the bandwidth is. It's usually measured in dB per octave most of the time. So if I put it by 6 dB per octave, what it means is that for every octave, meaning from one octave to the other, there's going to be 6 dB reduction. 6 dB reduction, 6 dB reduction, 6 dB reduction up until the end. If I increase it and it goes higher, you can see that the slope becomes steeper. It becomes steeper. But still at 24, 300, it doesn't mean that everything from 300 is being filtered out. Take note of that. So most cases, for example, if you're using say, a guitar and they say filter out everything 100 and below, and then if you drag it down to 100, this 102 for example, most of the time it's not really 100. See, it's between 60 and 100. That being known, you have to note that. And then moving on, we have the low pass filter, which is going to be the opposite of the high pass filter. The low pass filter will let the low pass and cut the high, which means that low pass filter can also be called high cut filter. They're just confusing you. Don't mind them. The same thing happens here. If I roll it off, it becomes darker. I'm saying everything 989 upwards, filter it out at 8 dB per octave. If I want it to not to be steeper, if I want it to be steeper, I guess in our next class we'll be hearing all of this with good material, so we can cite proper examples that explains the low pass filter and then the high pass filter. Then the next thing is the low frequency. Most EQ, by the way, don't give them, they don't put them into multi-bands like low frequency, low mid. You just use any one. One can go from 20 to 20 hertz. Like you can see here, it's 20 to 20 hertz. And then we can go from 0 to minus 19 dB, negative, and then also positive here. What happens is that this is the frequency. Let me turn it on. I activate it. And then let's get this back to the space. I turn it on and I activate it. I select what frequency I want to either boost or cut. And then I boost or I cut. I boost or I cut. Usually don't boost this way because you don't boost too much or cut too much. What happens if you notice as I boost, as I set it to 132, you will notice that it's not actually 132. Yeah, this is 132 thereabout, but it's still also boosting everything before 132 and quite a lot after 132. What does this tell us? It's just a function of the Q, quotient of change. Like I said, you can, most of the time, there is no, you can't pinpoint a frequency and say, for example, I'm working with 132 hertz. And that's the only hertz I'm going to work with. What you do in that case is you just inject some whistling sound or some kind of artifacts that you don't like, you wouldn't like. So it whistles in song when you do that. Say, for example, I made it like this. I don't ever make the Q this narrow to work like this. This brings in something that sounds like it has a sound. So it injects all of that into your source material, and at the end of the day, you won't enjoy material. As a matter of fact, if you find yourself cutting or boosting, and then where you have to do something like this, and then you're doing something like this, and then you're doing something like this, you're doing something like this. The truth is, and then they become this narrow, and then you're doing plenty like this, you're mangling the sound, you're destroying the sound. There are two things that can happen in this case. Either the material was not recorded properly, or it wasn't recorded properly, or you have some phase issue somewhere in what material they've given to you. So it's either you re-record or you find a way around it. But don't ever do this. Don't find yourself doing this. What you do is you just inject, you're taking out vital information from your source material. Don't find yourself doing this. It's a wrong way to EQ, by the way. It's horrible looking. So in this case, you can even see that it doesn't really pinpoint 100. Let me take this to 100 so you understand what I'm saying. This is directly 100. If you look at it, this is 100. So it's not 100. It's taking like 101, 102 all the way, and it's taking up to 90, up to 80, and then before 100 and after 100. That's what I'm trying to say. So most of the time when you boost or you cut, you have to make it slightly wide. The Q should be slightly wide, not narrow. The narrower it becomes, the honkier, and then some whistling, funny, strange sound you'll be adding, or you'll be subtracting vital information from your source material. Another thing that the 3-band EQ by Avid has is a shelve. If I select this, I remove it from bell and I put it to shelve. And then what shelve does is that it's not, you can see the shape. If I say shelve 100 hertz upwards and I increase it, what I'm doing is I'm taking everything 100 and below is going to increase all of the information in that frequency, in that band. So if I reduce, I am reducing everything 100 and below. But if you notice the Q, it's not really 100. So there's still part of 101, 105, all the way to probably like 150. Yeah, all the way up to 150, give or take there. And that's for shelf. For your, let me turn this off. For your lower mid, it's the same thing where you have a frequency where you can adjust all the way up, information all the way cut. And then it's most times advised that you always cut first so that you correct first before you try to boost. I think we'll go deeper into that as time goes on. So this is pretty much a parametric where this can go from 1000 to 40. So if you have anything to do within 40 hertz to 1000 hertz, this low mid frequency is the man for the job. We have the mid frequency, which goes from 80 kilohertz, 8 kilohertz to from 125 to 80. That's what is in. And then we have the high from 200 to 18 kilohertz. If I turn this on, you will see it from here to here. That's it moving. And also for the high frequency, it's got the bell. Let me activate. It's got the bell, and then it's got the shelf. And it's talking about shelf. There's something about shelf. A lot of people didn't know this. It was so much confusing, and it was also confusing to me too when I started. There's a Pultec style. There's an EQ called the Pultec EQ. The Pultec EQ uses more of shelving. They later upgraded at some point. They were using the bell shape too, but the filters were usually shelving filters, so that at this point, if I have it this way, everything 2 kilohertz up to 20 kilohertz, I'm shelving it upwards. But what happens when I extend the Q gradually? You will see that it's not everything from 2 kilohertz. This is 2 kilohertz. Now it's gone as low as 100 hertz for a wider Q. But if I make the Q very narrow, extremely narrow, what you have is that you are attenuating, meaning I am reducing at 2 kilohertz, and I'm also shelving to increase at 2 kilohertz. This was a bit confusing for many people over the years or over the period of time, because they didn't understand how you could attenuate and boost at the same time. Let me show you a classic Pultec EQ. I've got a Pultec EQ. Yeah, this is a Pultec EQ. And then let me show you this, just a second. All right, fantastic. So this is a Pultec EQ. This is from UAD. They modeled this. You can see that I have my low frequency set to 60. And then if I boost, it means that I am shelving up everything from 60 hertz downwards. And I can also not just boost, but I can attenuate, meaning that about that 60 hertz, I am also reducing, which will be, this will be best represented this way. Let me show you. I'm boosting at about 7. And then if I have this set this way, and I am attenuating at about 30. So this explains it better. It will look like this. So meaning that I am boosting at about 7 dB gain, but I am also attenuating with the help of this Q set to 2 at about 3 dB at about 100. Not spot on 100, but just about 100. That's what happens when you set this EQ like this. It also now depends on how you send the bandwidth, if it's going to be broad or it's going to be sharp. Pretty much, I am sure you're understanding, or I'm sure you're getting something out of today. So, another type of EQ that I'd like to talk about is this, all right, air from Slate Digital, what you notice is that you see low cut here, low cut, and then I can set the Q to give you that same effect of a Pultec style. So this is the low cut, this is frequency. I can reduce it, I can make this a lot more steeper. And then you have the parametric, which is the bell, where this is the frequency, where you can set the frequency. This is the Q, how narrow or how wide. And then the gain, cut or boost. And the same thing here. You could have that same. Let me turn this off a bit. This is now the high cut, or let me show you guys from this way so you get to understand what I'm trying to do. So you notice that what they call the low cut in this Air EQ, the low cut in this Air EQ, what is called low cut here, look at it here, it's called the high pass filter. And then what they call high cut is called the low pass filter. And then the good thing about the Air is that I like this Air because Air is not a stock plugin, by the way. It's made by Slate Digital. It's got spectrum analyzer. And I mean, this analyzer, I can tell how the source material is doing, what's happening, what's not happening, apart from me working properly. I'll come back to this and I'll explain certain things to you with this EQ. So it's also a parametric EQ, but it's got a spectrum analyzer added to it. Moving on, I want to talk about console EQ. Console EQs are equalizers that are attached to consoles. Popular example will be the SSL. SSL EQ was made popular by the SSL 4000 console. There's the E series and then there's the G series, I guess. Yeah, those two series are popular. For Neve, there's Neve R88, yeah, 800. And then Neve also have their own EQ. There's API, there's Trident, there's EMI. There are quite a lot of them. But all of this EQ do the same thing, don't get me wrong. The only difference is that they add some overtones or what we call saturation, or sometimes people mistake it for color, you know, to your sound, to the source material. And in most times, people tend to like the color. Some don't like these colors. And most of them are modeled after hardware. Guess what? They have to model not just the EQ, they have to model the input gain stage, the output gain stage of the entire console, and not just the EQ. So all of this put together, by the time they design these plugins tends to sound, have a particular tone or a particular character to them. A good example, let's talk about the SSL. SSL, there's quite a lot of SSL out there. People have modeled Slate Digital. This is SSL by Waves, yeah. And then if you look at this, these are the filters. This is the low, this is the high pass filter, and then this is the low pass filter. And then you can see it's starting from 16 all the way up to 3, you know. And then this is your shelf. This is your shelf, which you can turn to a bell. If you engage this button, you turn it to a bell. And then this is, but it's usually in your shelf. And then the next one is your high mid frequency or high mid filter, which is pretty much a bell. And then this is the Q, like the Q in the parametric I showed you the other time. This is the frequency. This is the amount of gain, whether you want to increase it or you want to reduce it. And then this is the lower mid. This is the frequency. This is the gain. This is the Q, high or low Q. And then this is the shelf, lower shelf, which also you can make it to be a bell if you choose to. But in this case, the reason why this will sound different from, say, the parametric, let's say this one, is just that they've modeled the analog or the circuitry of what's it called? The circuit of this SSL from this. This is probably just a plain engineered EQ to sound. This will have some sort of noise, some sort of stuff to it. And as you can see, this is not just the EQ. You have the EQ section, you have the dynamic section, the compressor, the gates, in and out, and then this is the analog in and out. This adds a bit of hum, a bit of noise that usually this particular board had by the time they modeled it. Another one will be this Neve. Neve is also a popular one. Neve, this is the Neve 1073. This was modeled by Universal Audio. You can see the filter here. This is the high-pass filter. The difference most time with this is that first, they are fixed. Unlike the parametric where you could go from 0 to 100 just like this. These ones are fixed. This is either you turn it off 50, 80, 160, 300, and that's it. But this can go everything in between to 3K, 3 kilohertz. And you've got the first shelf, which is a shelf. You've got the first shelf, and also the frequency are fixed. 35, 60, 110, 200. So it's either that way. And then we have the mid, the only bell, which is from 300 to 7,200. And then we have the high shelf. This is usually about 10 or 12K upwards. But the difference here is that they tend to just model the circuits and everything in between these compressors in between this EQ are model. The input units, the gain stage, whether it's a line signal or a mic signal, all of these are modeled in this case, added to the EQ. So this in turn affects the sound and then makes the sound, colors the sound and gives, you know the thing I talked about harmonics the other time. Maybe it's got a 20 hertz, it's got a 200, so specifically they have the ones that makes Neve sound the way Neve sounds, Neve EQ sounds. There's another one by API. I think I've got an API somewhere around here. Yes. This is an API. You can see that this was modeled, is also a console EQ. The console EQ, this also has a fixed frequency. This is me boosting, this is me attenuating. And then this, you can change it from a shelf to a bell. This is a bell, this is a bell. You can change this one to a shelf or a bell. And then their frequencies are fixed. They are not anything in between. They have their sound, they have the way they, when your source material goes through them, it adds a bit of color, a bit of saturation here and there. Are they as good as parametric EQ? Yes. Are parametric EQ better than them? Yes, they could be better than them, because sometimes you don't just want any saturation. You just want that pure linear sound that you have from your source material out there. I mean, then you don't need to go for anything to color it. And also I like to use, what's it called? Let me use this air spectrum to show you what I mean by color and then what I mean by saturation. You'll notice that of my air EQ, you'll notice that as I turn it up, this is off. As I turn it on, you notice some tiny signal. I don't know if you can see this. Let me see if I increase. Fantastic. This is me increasing it. So I'm turning the EQ fully to maximum. Nothing is happening. Let me set all of this back to 0. I'm setting all of the EQ back to 0. Filter 0, flat, everything flat. But I just increase the fader and I just increase the output. If you look at this closely, you will notice that all of these are harmonics, all of these are saturation that will be added to your source material by the time you EQ. And then this is what makes Neve have their sound, or what makes Neve EQ have its own kind of color. All of these are saturations that will be added to whatever information you have already, or whatever the information of your source material is. And to prove to you, as soon as I turn the power off from the Neve, you see nothing is happening again. I'm turning it on, and voila. You have it. I turn it off, nothing is happening. Okay, moving forward, there's the Manly. This is mainly a passive EQ. I didn't talk so much about passive EQ. Maybe in our next class, but passive EQ, there's nothing so much about them. They don't have the kind of circuits they have isn't the kind of circuit parametric or graphic EQs have. And also, finally, the difference between a graphic EQ and a parametric EQ will be that a graphic EQ has a fixed Q. A parametric EQ has a variable Q, meaning the Q can be wide, the Q can be narrow, and there's some sort of intelligent EQs also, probably equalizer I'd like to talk about. It's this by Sonox. It's called Oxford EQ. Oxford EQ is a parametric EQ. Like you see the low. This is the low cut filter, also known as the high pass filter. So here you'll see that it's called low cut, LF, meaning low cut filter. And then this with our stock parametric will be high pass. And just to show you that they're going to do the same thing, it's the same thing. So high pass filter or low cut filter, the same thing. They're going to do pretty much the same thing. And the difference is that this can go as high as 36 dB per octave, 30, 6, 12, pretty much the same thing. If I turn this down to 12, you see, pretty much the same thing. Nothing missing, nothing broken. That's it. So, and then they have their own. The high cut filter is what is known as the low pass filter here. If I drag this in, we'll be having almost the same thing. Same old, same old. So moving on, the major difference between this and this is that the Oxford EQ has a type of Q to it. It's a bit, they added this little intelligent thing happening with their EQ. A good example will be that, let me take this lower mid frequency. Let me engage this one, and let's go. This will be the gain. This will be the frequency. This will be the Q. So what happens with this is that if I have the type 1 Q, and I increase it all the way, you see that it's proportional. I'm not pinpointing just 200. Let's have it at 200. 201. So I have it at 201. I can't increase just 201. I have to increase all of slightly above and then slightly before and after 200. But what happens if I change the type of the Q to a type 2 and I increase? It's proportional. So you see, there is before and then there is after. But once I try to drag it down, it's narrower, which is smart. It's very intelligent. What they've tried to do is that they know that most times when you do a reductive EQ, it's because you found something that you want to cut out. So you're not cutting out so much. They make it narrower when you're cutting or when you're attenuating, but when you're boosting, it's proportional. And then if I go to type 3 has its own also. Where type 3, I think type 3 is the same thing. Type 3 is not the same amount, cuts the same amount, boost. And then they have the type 4. Type 4, what type 4 does is that at the beginning is broad, and then as you go further, it starts to thin out. When you boost higher, it starts to thin out. At the beginning is broad, then as you go down, it starts to thin out. Pretty much just little differences. These differences make a lot. It's just that people have found out that they found a way to hear these EQs. They understand this EQ the way they sound. So they tend to say one EQ is better than the other. No EQ is better than the other. Besides color and what else? Pretty much color. Every basic EQ will get your sound where you want to get it to. That's pretty much it. Also, there's also the this was modeled after by Abbey Roads. This is the EMI. Abbey Roads has more of the EMI. Yes, this is the EMI console EQ, and then here its name, you can see it's just the old treble. This would be the gain. So turn up the gain up, gain down, and then this would be the frequency, and then this would be the low. This would be low, and then this would be the the presence will be like a mid. Excuse me, this is mid, and then this is the bass. This is the bass. It's got the dynamic section because it's modeled from an EMI console. And then this got stereo spread, and then noise, which the noise would be to inject analog noise that comes with the noise. And you can see the driver also. I bet if I have this before the air, if what they've done is correct, I should be seeing it on my what's it called? Oh, fantastic. You can see the amount of noise and distortion. Let me turn down everything around here, and let's leave it this way. All right, so you can see just by me turning on reducing the noise and the drive, you will notice that, let me clear this out. How is that supposed to be cleared or something? Okay. Yeah, fantastic, cleared. You will notice that if I increase the noise on the EMI, it's called TG1234, and I increase the drive. Let me turn on the analyzer. Voila. That's the amount of noise or the amount of saturation that's going to happen if I was using this, besides the actual EQ. Let me flatten all of the EQ. The EQ is flat, nothing added, but you notice the amount of noise and the amount of harmonics, amount of color, or what's popularly known as amount of saturation that's going to be added to whatever it is that your source material is. Thank you for today. I'm sure you've learned a lot. And then if you've learned a lot, please, or you have questions, I would like to answer your questions. I would like to get back to you. I would like us to interact. If you think there's a place I'm not covering that is not saying much and you want me to cover, please feel free to send me a mail, kaystrings@gmail.com, gracehillrecording@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Kaystring, Twitter, YouTube. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. From my YouTube channel, you'll be getting a lot more, not the short clips, but you get the full video, you have full access. And then after a while, all of these classes will be for people on my YouTube channel, because YouTube channel, I'm able to record, comprehensive and more detailed classes or detailed tutorials on YouTube channel rather than having them on Instagram in short bits and short clips. So subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram. It's Bettermusic, Better You, Kaystrings, sponsored by Grace Hill. Thank you so much for staying by also to the end. Next week, I'll be talking about how to use an EQ, or how I use EQ, or in the next week, I'll be talking about how to use EQ, how I use EQ. I'll bring in some materials. I'll bring in maybe vocals. Someone record vocals with me, or I'll record a pre-recorded vocals, dry, and guitars, and then I'll tell you how I EQ, even bass guitar, horns, how I do all of that. That's what we'll be talking about next week. You're welcome anytime. Don't forget to send me messages, subscribe, comments. Love you. Thank you. It's Better Music, Better You. Go make music, or make them better than you did before. Cheers.